Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a fun one because we are going to be playing with the new Colourpop palette, Roaring Hearts. This is one of Colourpop's newer collections. It is a pressed powder palette. It comes with 10 shades. I actually mentioned this in my recent anti-haul. I'll link it in the cards up above. I was not interested in this palette because it's just neutrals. I really like the concept, but it doesn't make for a very interesting color story. It doesn't mean that it's like an ugly palette or a bad color story. It's just not exactly the best match for me in my personal collection. I have quite a few neutral palettes, so I didn't need another. But alas, because I've anti-hauled it, I did call it in that video. I said, watch, because I mentioned it in this video, it'll show up on my doorstep. And lo and behold, here it is. So originally I was going to compare it to the Bare Necessities palette, but I couldn't really find enough dupes in that palette to make like a fair comparison. So what I did instead was I just pulled a lot of Colourpop dupes. And then when I was creating this look, which if you want to see how I did a little demo later in the video, I thought it looked awfully similar to the Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam palette. It does have fewer shades. This has 10, this has 14, but I thought I would do a little bit of a comparison between these two as well. As for life updates, we are moving on Sunday. It is now Friday. I'm a little nervous. So this will be the last video that I'm filming in this room. I am really sad about it. I don't want to talk about it. I'm really dreading moving. I don't want to move. I love this house. I love my roommate. Like, he's my best friend. So this whole move has been really hard on me emotionally. So yeah, if I'm a little absent within the next week, it's just because I'm moving and settling in. My new beauty room is right now mint green. So I don't want like a greenish hue or tint in my videos, so I'm gonna paint that room white before I actually film anything. So I'm not sure how long that'll take. I'm gonna try to get done ASAP, but you know, things always happen when you move, so nothing's guaranteed. So please be patient with me over the next week and a half. I also have my bridal shower tomorrow, so it's a really busy weekend this weekend. And yeah, without further ado, let's just get into swatching the palette and doing some comparisons between other things that I already have in my collection. You know what this also kind of reminds me of? The Balm Nude palette from back in the day. This kind of reminds me of that as well. I don't have that palette though to compare it to. I used to have it in my collection, but I decluttered it a long time ago. But it also kind of gives me those kind of vibes, you know? Oh, sorry, excuse me, I haven't really slept well lately. So the first shade we have here is called Fancy That. It's like a white shade that has a gold shift. It is so pretty. At first, I thought it was just like a sparkly white and I was like, ugh, what the hell am I gonna do with that? But the gold shift really makes this quite a beautiful shade. It kind of reminds me of Vanilla Quartz Highlighter by Becca. Colourpop describes this shade as a metallic opal with a gold shift. I was surprised at the uniqueness of this shade. I thought for sure I would have something at least semi-similar, but I didn't really. So what I ended up using is, hold on, from the Bare Necessities palette, it's the shade Idle Hour. But it's not a great dupe. It's more of like a fleshy tone than like a goldish white. It's the closest I could find though. This shade is really unique and really pretty. So yeah, that is the best dupe that I could find in my Colourpop collection, and it's not even a very strong dupe. Next up, we have the shade Soft Gem, and Colourpop describes this one as a matte neutral soft brown. To dupe this one, I used the shade Like a Tatooine from the Mandalorian The Child palette, or the Baby Yoda palette. It has a little bit more orange to it than the Lost Gem shade, but they're still pretty similar. Next up, we have the shade Nightlife. This is the shade that's all over my lid today. It should be noted that this shade is not suitable for the immediate eye area. Colourpop describes this one as a metallic neutral gold. The closest I could find in my Colourpop collection is the shade Love Song from the It's a Mood palette. That's this one right here. And in person, it's a little peachier and a little bit lighter. I'm not sure if that's going to pick up on camera, but they are definitely different. But again, this is the closest dupe I could find. Next up, we have the shade Pour Another, and Colourpop describes this one as a matte peachy brown. And I feel like Colourpop launches one of these in like every single palette, so I was very surprised when I had a hard time duping this. And to dupe this, it is a significantly darker shade. I think this is a shade from the Big Poppy palette. I'm a little unsure because I forgot to write down on the back what palette I got this from. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the Big Poppy. I just don't know what shade, and it's not even that similar. It is darker. Next up, we have the shade Cafe Society, and Colourpop describes this one as a metallic rose gold. And to dupe this one, I used the shade Brunch from the Off Melrose palette. They are pretty similar. I think this one has a slightly pinker shift but there's not a ton of difference between them. Next up, we have the shade Foxtrot, and Colourpop describes this one as a matte yellow soft brown. And to dupe this one, I used the shade Blissed Out from the Little Ray of Sunshine palette, which is right here, and it's slightly more orange and a little bit deeper. Next up, we have the shade Phonograph, and Colourpop describes this one as a metallic antique bronze with gold and silver pinpoints. It's a really pretty color. Every time I see it instead of phonograph, I read pornograph. Every time I read it, I'm like in shock, and then I reread it and I'm like, oh, okay. And to dupe this one, I used the shade Tiger's Eye from the So Jaded palette in collaboration with Kathleen Lights. This shade has less of a reflect and more of a warm toned base shade versus the phonograph shade, but in the light they do look pretty similar. Next up, we have the shade That Sax, and Colourpop describes this one as a matte deep brown. And to dupe this shade, I used Crack On from the Bare Necessities palette, which has a little bit more red to it, and it looks like it's a little bit deeper. Next up, we have the shade Lindy Hop, which is described as a matte blackened brown. And the closest dupe I could find is slightly lighter. It's the shade Our Deal from the It's a Mood palette. As you can see, this one is a lot more pigmented and rich, whereas you can kind of see my skin showing through in this shade. And lastly, we have the shade Grand Dame, which is a deep black. And to dupe this one, I used the shade Rock Bottom from the Stone Cold Fox palette. And as you can see, they are different undertones of black. I don't know how Colourpop keeps releasing blacks and making them ever so slightly different. I think on the eyes it would be probably the exact same, but like swatch, they're not exact. Okay, and those were the similar shades that I could find within my Colourpop collection, and now I'm going to compare it to the Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam palette. As you can see, they are different. This one only has 10 shades, this has 14 shades. You're also paying a lot more for the Soft Glam palette than you are the Colourpop. The Colourpop palette is $16 US, but it's on sale for $11.20. You also get 9 grams of product in the Colourpop palette. Whereas for the Anastasia Beverly Hills palette, you're gonna pay $56 US. I think it's currently on sale for Black Friday for $39.20 on the Anastasia Beverly Hills website, and you only get 10 grams of product. So it's only a gram of product more, but you do get more shades. So I've just done a little cost comparison, and now let's get into determining how similar these palettes really are. Okay, so I don't really know if there are a ton of dupes in here, but let's just kind of go through the shades and see what's similar versus not. The first shade, Fancy That, I don't really see anything duping this shade. It's really quite unique. I think the closest would be Glistening from the Soft Glam palette. I'll just give you a little swatch. It's got a lot more peach in it, less gold. So this is the Colourpop and this is the Anastasia. Yeah, not super similar. I don't really think that there is a dupe for this shade here called Lost Gem. Everything in this palette is just pulling far too warm, except for the shade Dusty Rose here at the top, but it has way too much pink to be a dupe. So I don't really think that there is a dupe for that shade in this palette. Next up, we have the shade Nightlife from the Colourpop palette, and I think the closest dupe to this one would be the shade Fairy from the Anastasia Beverly Hills, which is a lot lighter. The shade Nightlife has more of an orange to it, which is interesting because I did say in the video that there's not a lot of orange in this color. So this is the shade Fairy, which is lighter and less orangey, more of a subtle gold, versus this being more of a true gold. Okay, so this is the shade Pour Another, and there are 2 potential dupe-ish shades for this shade. I think the closest is Orange Soda, which is the lighter one, and then Burnt Orange is a little bit deeper. I think a mixture between these two would be like the ideal shade to create the Pour Another color. So yeah, they're not exact, but they do give a similar effect. Next up, we have the shade Cafe Society here, and the dupe I have for this shade is the color Rose Pink from the Soft Glam palette. This one does pull more of like a coppery orange versus this one a true metallic pink. I wouldn't say they're dupes, but they're decently close. As for the shade Foxtrot, I wouldn't say there's like a super comparable dupe. I think the closest one would be Orange Soda again, even though Orange Soda does pull more orange versus the Foxtrot shade pulling more of a yellow toned brown. Again, not very similar. So next up, to dupe the shade Phonograph from Colourpop, we have the shade Bronze from the Soft Glam palette. I feel like they are pretty similar in their base, but this shade does have more of like a greenish gold flip than this one. This one has like a true neutral-ish silvery reflect. Okay, next up we have the shade That Sax, and for this dupe we have 2 possibilities. This one is Sienna, which is a lot more red toned, and the closer dupe is the shade Rustic. Not exact, but I think Rustic would give a similar vibe in a look for sure. Next up for this shade here called Lindy Hop, I have the shade Cypress Umber in the Soft Glam palette. This one does seem like it's a little deeper, maybe a little more opaque than the shade Cypress Umber, but again, very, very close. And lastly, we have the shade Grand Dame and the shade Noir from the Soft Glam palette. I feel like this shade's almost like a blue toned grayish black versus this shade is a really true black. And yeah, that is it for my comparison of the Soft Glam versus the Roaring Hearts palette. And now we can get into a little demo on this eye look if you're interested. Okay friends, let's start on a little bit of an eye look. I think I'm feeling kind of like a cut crease today, like a full cut crease, not a half cut crease. So let's just get right into it. For this video, I'm not gonna do my other eye in the other palette just because I am a little bit short for time and that kind of concept does take up quite a bit of time. Today we have to get a lot of packing done and then we also have to bring some boxes over to the new house. And not only do I have a lot to do physically, I'm just really mentally tired from this move. Kind of snuck up on me, you know? It's my own fault. I haven't really packed up until like the last week, but I'm really emotional about leaving this house. I've grown attached to this house, which is so funny because I've only been here a year. So yeah, I'm really attached to this house and I'm having a hard time letting it go. I'm not really a person who deals well with change. So emotionally, I'm processing that. So I'm really tired emotionally as well. So that's just a long-winded way of me saying that I'm going to just do the one eye. I am going to show you the dupes that I could come up with, but they're not very good dupes anyway. So I don't think the two eyes would be super comparable. So I'm just going to do the one in case you guys wanted to see how to achieve this look. So as per usual, I am going to prep my lids with my e.l.f. Hydrating Camo Concealer and just buffing this out with my little Beauty Blender dupe. Then I'm going to dip into this warm brown shade called That Sax. I'm just going to take it on the Sigma Angled Brow E75 and I'm going to draw above my crease. Doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just kind of sketching one out, and instead of bringing it down when my eye kind of droops down, I'm gonna bring it up towards the brow. Ooh, that wasn't very good. That's okay though. You can always clean it up. That's the nice thing about cut creases. And I'm just gonna kind of feather out the product a little bit. And I took that shadow a little bit too close to my brow for my liking, so I'm just taking this little brush with some concealer on it and I'm just kind of cleaning that up. Super easy fix. And I'm not going to bother setting down my lid because what I am going to be doing is taking off the concealer, reapplying it to get a really sharp line, and then applying shadow on top. So I'm not even going to bother setting it because I'm just going to remove it soon anyway. Then I'm going to take a little synthetic brush. This is a Colourpop E10 and I'm going to go in with the shade Pour Another. It's like a warm toned brown. It kind of reminds me of like MAC Soft Brown from back in the day. It's like a warm orangey brown. Also kind of reminds me of like Anastasia Beverly Hills Orange Soda. I feel like this is a very strong Soft Glam dupe. Ooh, I should totally get out the Soft Glam and do like a little bit of a comparison because I couldn't find anything in my Colourpop collection that was super similar. I was going to compare it to the Bare Necessities, but there just wasn't enough of a similarity to really draw that comparison. So I'm definitely going to pull out my Soft Glam palette and we'll see. So I'm just going to apply this shade just above where I applied that first darker brown. Just like that. It's not coming together quite yet. It does take a little bit, so just be patient. This is the lightest brown in the palette. It's called Foxtrot, and I'm going to use this on a Colourpop E21. This one is a little bit bigger than the other two because this is the lightest shade. I do like to use a bit of a bigger brush when I use a lighter shade, kind of to, you know, buff everything out a little nicer. Okay, so it is still looking a little bit questionable, but that's fine. We just got to trust the process. I'm then going to take my Urban Decay pressed powder and I'm just going to apply this to the brow bone just to set the concealer that's up there. This allows me to blend really nicely the shades that are in my crease. So what I'm going to do first is take this little pencil brush and I'm going to take the darkest shade, That Sax, and I'm also going to mix it with Pour Another. I'm going to mix the two darker ones that I used. And then with this pencil brush, I'm just going to go over that line. I like to place the line down first so that it's nice and precise, and then use a bit of a bigger brush to kind of diffuse the line that I drew. Okay, and then I'm going to go into that lightest shade, Foxtrot, again. And I'm just going to kind of diffuse where the warm brown shade ends. Then just taking a small brush with a little more of that powder foundation, I'm just gonna place that again in the brow bone, and that just kind of helps diffuse that lightest shade a little bit better. Okay, and now for cleanup, I'm just going to take a bit of my micellar water on a little pointed Q-tip. Regular Q-tip would work just fine as well. And I'm just gonna clean up my lid. This is why I don't set the lid, because when the lid is set with powder, this step is a lot harder, just to make it a little easier for myself. Okay, and the cleanup doesn't have to be perfect again, because I'm gonna go in with my e.l.f. Hydrating Camo. I just put a little bit on the back of my hand, and I'm gonna use this tiny little flat brush, and I'm just going to apply this to the lid here, and I can kind of clean up any areas that I didn't perfect in the cleanup stage. Okay, then I am going to take this little flat brush, and I'm going to take this nice light gold called Nightlife, and I'm just going to apply this shade on the lid. That's a pretty color. This is a really nice gold in my opinion. It doesn't pull too orange, but it still kind of has like that golden aspect to it without being too orangey bronze. Okay, now for liner, I'm going to take the black shade called Grand Dame, just right here. And I'm gonna do like some smoky liner instead of like a liquid liner. And for this, I just like to follow the angle that I've kind of done on this upper part here. I like to follow the angle as best I can so that it's like 2 straight lines. I find that's just what's the most flattering on my eye shape. Okay, and I just cleaned up those lines with a little bit of micellar water. So what I'm gonna do is do this eye, finish the rest of my face, and I will come back with the eyes done, and then I can let you know my final thoughts on this palette. Okay, so now that we're done that, I'll just give you my final thoughts. Though this palette is neutral, I wouldn't say it's super easily dupeable, especially not within my personal Colourpop collection. I have a lot of color. It's kind of what I'm drawn to. I do have the Bare Necessities palette, but I honestly wouldn't say that they're super similar. If anything, I think the Soft Glam palette does give the most similar vibes, but they're definitely not dupes of each other, especially because they don't even have the same number of shades. But very similar vibes, kind of a similar layout, some similar shades within the palettes. And though they are similar, I really wouldn't call them dupes. I would also say that unless you have a fairly extensive Colourpop collection, you might not have anything quite so similar to the Roaring Hearts palette in your collection already. Of course, it depends on everyone's collection, whether it's a good buy for you or not. I think, again, you wouldn't be disappointed in the quality. The quality is very good for the Colourpop palette. Everything performed really nicely, so it's more about if you like the color story to determine if it would be a good purchase for you and make sure that you don't have anything like too similar in your collection. So yeah, I think those are my final thoughts on this palette. I think you'd enjoy it if the color story speaks to you. If you feel like you'd get a lot of use out of this, I really don't think you'd be disappointed. And that's all for me today. That is all for my last video in this beauty room. Again, okay, I can't talk about it or else I might cry. I've just gotten so attached to this beauty room. I've grown so much over the last year, so it's kind of crazy. Anyways, that is it for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far. Please don't forget to subscribe if you want to. If you don't, that's okay. I just really appreciate you being here. It helps out my channel so very much by you watching, so thank you. Please leave any video requests you may have in the comments down below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys!